Hey, welcome to Retirement Made Easy. Have you ever paid for something that ended up costing you a lot more money than you had anticipated? I know I have, but retirement doesn't have to be like that. In fact, we can look at studies, we can look at research of how people's spending actually changes as they age in retirement. And once we know what's ahead of us in the years to come, that puts us in a better position today to be able to plan. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how your spending habits are going to change in retirement and how you can put a plan in place today to account for those changes. We're going to go over two charts that will detail the spending every single year as you get older and how that spending will adjust over time. And it will really change your mindset of how you look at retirement. Instead of a 30-year journey, it'll break it up into phases of retirement, seasons of your retirement. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first chart that we need to understand is what we've probably all heard of, the three phases of retirement planning. And they're called the go-go years, which is your most active phase. That's typically, like I said, the first third of your retirement or 10 years. That's when we're the healthiest, we're the most active. Physically, we're maybe traveling, we're spending a lot of time on hobbies and other pursuits that we might enjoy. And then we go into phase two, which doesn't happen overnight. It's kind of a gradual transition, but we get to the more passive years, the slow-go years. And so maybe we're traveling less, we're maybe spending less on hobbies and things like that. And then we slowly then transition into the final phase, which is also called the no-go years. At this point, maybe we're getting older, our health is declining. Naturally, we're going to the doctor, more doctor's appointments and things like that. And what's really interesting about this phase, and everybody would love to have a crystal ball and know exactly what their healthcare or long-term care expenses are going to be and how long we're going to need that care, but we don't. So typically in that last phase, for a lot of people, our expenses will actually spike up due to long-term care, whether it's assisted living, in-home care that we might have, something like that. So the next chart that we're going to get into is it's going to break it down expense by expense by expense as we get older over time and how those expenses change, because some expenses actually go up as we get older, and not talking about inflation. Of course, inflation is going to always carry our fixed expenses. So that's kind of the one downfall of this chart is it does not take into account inflation over time. So looking at the go-go years here, we have to plan on inflation and the cost of living every single year. Everything we buy goes up, whether that's our healthcare, grocery bill, transportation. Everything seems to go up. I've never gotten a call from a utility company, whether that's a water bill, a cell phone bill, my electric bill. They always seem to go up over time. But let's get into this next chart to show our expenses and how they're going to, I guess, differentiate from one year to the next as we get older in retirement. Okay, so this next chart kind of shows, looking at, and again, this is JP Morgan's research, and they looked at households with net worths from $1 million to $3 million, so of investable wealth. And so they looked at, okay, from 45 all the way until 95, how your expenses typically change over time. And you can see, starting with travel at the top, looks like the most amount of traveling is really done, and peak spending occurs between the years of 50 and 54. And that kind of goes down over time. You can see less traveling, and it represents a smaller portion of the budget as we get older. And then you can see the next expense, apparel and services. You can see it's really greatest 50 to 54, and over time, maybe we're not buying new clothes, we're not updating our wardrobe over time, and so those expenses as a proportion of our total budget, they actually really decline as we age. And entertainment is the other thing. Maybe whether it's golf, going to the movies, whatever entertainment looks like for you, you can see that's another thing that tends to decline as we get older, but it doesn't go away completely. Then that's kind of miscellaneous things. Transportation. So you can see transportation expenses, they peak in your 50s and they tend to decline over time. And really, by the time you get into your 80s and 90s, not spending too much on transportation. We're more homebodies. We don't travel as much. We don't drive as far. I remember my grandparents, by the time they got into their 80s, it was, hey, you come to us, and they just didn't drive as much. And here's a pro tip: is anybody looking to buy a used vehicle, maybe buy it from somebody in their 80s that's trying to sell a vehicle. Chances are, if they change the oil and did the regular maintenance and upkeep, it's probably going to have very, very low miles and was probably garage kept most of its life. I actually purchased a vehicle from somebody in their 80s, and it was in tip-top shape, and the miles on the vehicle were practically nothing. So that's kind of expected, is transportation would go down as we get older. Food and beverage, you can kind of see, it does kind of peak. Of course, we're still going to maybe not go out to eat as much when we're in our, at this phase, 80s and 90s, certainly. But that does kind of decline over time. What's really, really interesting is education expenses. When we're maybe paying off student loans in our 40s, maybe 40s, 50s, 60s even, paying for kids' schooling as well. And you can see that does tend to even stay put in the 70s for some people. Maybe they're paying for grandkids' education expenses. Housing, including mortgage expense, that does tend to decline over time. With that, if you happen to live in one state that has a freeze on property taxes, that can be a cause of your housing expenses going down. And also maybe you get the mortgage paid off. Maybe in your 60s, you can see this dip here. Maybe mortgages get paid off and you don't have that housing expense. What will go up over time is charity and gifts. So as we get older, naturally we become more charitable. That's what this study is showing us. And you can see in your 80s, people tend to increase their giving, whether that's to family or charities. That's kind of all lumped in, whether it's a gift or a charitable donation. That tends to really, really increase, and it plays the biggest part of somebody's budget once they're in their 80s and 90s. And then last, this is not a surprise to any of us probably, healthcare expenses. Typically, those last 10, 15 years of life, they are going to peak. You speak with any 80-year-old, they've got a book full of appointments going to the doctor, and some more than others, of course. But you know what I'm talking about, where healthcare expenses will naturally, just more trips to the doctor, maybe surgeries or procedures as our body kind of ages. So that's not a shock at all. And then really, this should be a spike almost for some people, because again, if we're including long-term care costs, those last 5 years or so, that is very, very normal. So what can we say about this? Well, for some people more than others, they're going to like to travel more. And so your budget's not going to be the exact same as somebody else's, so you have to keep that in mind. And also, one thing I will say is those first 10 years, for a lot of people, there is not a drop in spending once they retire. We see a lot of people that even spend more in retirement in those first years. Maybe they're knocking off bucket list items that they had. They're doing more traveling. Every day's a Saturday. So I know if you're like me, I spend the most amount of money the entire week on Saturdays and Sundays. So keep in mind that this is going to be, this chart kind of does reflect how, the average person's spending will change over time based on this study that JP Morgan did. And this is available in JP Morgan's Guide to Retirement. This is actually a portion of that study. So I hope this illustration has been helpful, kind of showing how your spending is going to change throughout your retirement. What you spend on when you're 60 or 65, when you first retire, or maybe you retire at 70, that will likely change over time. And what's important to you, maybe at the first part of retirement, that might be different than the last part of retirement. And naturally, we know we're likely to spend our last 5 years of retirement. Most of our healthcare costs are going to be in that last 5 years of retirement. So we can kind of plan ahead. It's not going to be a linear starting with year one, and every year after that, it's going to get more and more expensive. Just the behavioral changes over time of what we choose to spend our money on will be different. So I hope this helps. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Retirement Made Easy. I'll see you next time. And remember, always dream big. Hello, I'm Greg Gonzalez, founder of RetireStrong Financial Advisors. If you want to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe. And if you want to learn more about how we help people plan for a successful retirement, visit our website, retirestrongfa.com.